The wind howled across the wide plains, carrying with it the scent of dust, smoke, and something untamed. The old saloon sat at the edge of town, its doors swinging in the restless breeze, lantern light flickering through its worn windows. Inside, the night was alive with hushed conversations, the scrape of boots across the wooden floor, and the clinking of glass against glass. It was a place where secrets were traded as easily as whiskey, and where a person could either find trouble or find themselves, sometimes both. He walked in with the quiet step of a man who had seen too much and carried more than most could bear. His coat was worn, his hat pulled low, but his presence drew eyes. There was something about him, the way his shoulders squared, the way his jaw tightened, as if holding back words that belonged to another time. Folks in towns like this had a way of noticing people like him. They might not know his story, but they could feel it pressing against the room like a storm that hadn't broken yet. At the far end of the saloon, she sat at a table all her own. The lamplight kissed her features, soft and sharp all at once, with a fire in her eyes that made even the most seasoned cowhands look twice before daring to approach. She had a way of commanding attention without asking for it, a way of making silence louder than a gunshot. Her dress was simple, but worn with a kind of pride, like she knew she didn't need silk or shine to hold her ground. The room shifted when their eyes met. It wasn't the first time they had seen each other, though the world around them pretended otherwise. There was history there, hidden beneath layers of time and choices, but history doesn't stay buried forever. He moved closer, each step deliberate, as though the ground itself were daring him forward. She didn't look away. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, her fingers brushing the rim of her glass, steady, as if she had been waiting. Whispers moved through the saloon like smoke. No one knew quite what to expect, but everyone knew enough to keep watching. A card game slowed to a halt. The piano player's hands faltered on the keys. And for a moment, even the whiskey lost its burn. Something was about to shift, and the air grew heavier with the weight of it. When he reached her table, he didn't sit right away. He stood there, his hand resting on the chair back, his eyes locked on hers. The silence stretched, filling the room with tension sharp enough to cut. She finally spoke, her voice calm, yet carrying an edge that left no room for doubt. "I wondered if you'd find me here," she said, her words more challenge than greeting. He pulled the chair back and sat across from her, the wood groaning under his weight. His hat stayed low, shadowing his face, but she knew him well enough to see past it. Their history wasn't written in letters or songs. It was etched in scars, in glances, in choices that couldn't be undone. "You left without a word?" he said quietly, the roughness in his tone betraying more than he intended. "And you came too late," she answered, lifting her glass and taking a slow sip, as if daring him to argue. For a while neither spoke. The saloon's noise started to return, but it was faint, like the world had dimmed around them. She set her glass down and leaned forward, her eyes never leaving his. "You know what I want," she said, her voice steady, though it carried something unspoken beneath it, something wild, something that demanded to be seen. His hand tightened on the table, knuckles white against the wood. He knew, he had always known. She had never been the kind of woman who bent easily, never been the type to follow the path others laid for her. She carved her own way, fierce and unrestrained, and she expected those who dared to walk beside her to be just as strong. The moment stretched thin, like a rope pulled to breaking. Then she leaned closer, her words low but clear, cutting through the air with a finality that made even the nearby tables fall quiet. "Spread me on the table," she ordered. Her voice was not soft, not pleading. It was command, born from fire and freedom, carrying the weight of a past that had shaped her into something unyielding. He froze, not from confusion, but from the storm of memories crashing through him. It wasn't the words themselves, but what they meant. She wasn't asking for gentleness, for half-steps, for hesitation. She was demanding truth, demanding him to meet her in the raw, unguarded place where their lives had always collided. His breath caught, his jaw tightened, and then he obeyed. Not with haste, not with recklessness, but with a quiet strength that matched hers. His hands pressed against the table, steady and sure, as if grounding both of them in that moment. The saloon held its breath. The world narrowed to two souls locked in a battle neither wanted to win, a pull neither could resist. Her eyes burned into his, wild and untamed, daring him to falter. But he didn't. He held her gaze steady as the earth, unshaken by the storm she carried inside. For the first time in years, maybe longer, she felt the weight in her chest lift, replaced by something raw, something dangerous, something real. The room seemed to fall away, the voices fading, the lanterns dimming until it was only them, caught in a fire neither had chosen, but both had ignited. The air between them was thick with everything unspoken, unguarded, desire, loss, hope, and none of it could be contained. He leaned in just enough for her to feel the warmth of his breath, his voice low, rough, and certain. "You don't know what you're asking for," he said. She smiled then, small and sharp, her lips curving with defiance. "Don't I?" The challenge hung there, pulsing with the promise of what was to come, drawing them both closer to the edge of something neither could turn away from. And though neither moved, the table between them felt less like a barrier, and more like the only thing holding back a flood. Outside, the wind roared against the saloon walls, rattling the windows as though even the storm wanted in. The night carried its secrets, the town held its silence, and within the worn wood and lantern light, two lives balanced on the edge of something dangerous and undeniable. No one in that room knew what would come next. Some leaned in, waiting for words, for action, for fire. Others looked away, uneasy with the weight of it, as if sensing that once the first step was taken, nothing would ever be the same. And in that suspended moment, with the world holding its breath, he reached across the table, his hand brushing against hers, not gently, not timidly, but with the force of a man who knew the risk and still chose it. Her eyes didn't waver, her hand didn't pull back. If anything, she leaned in further, daring the night itself to try and stop her. The lantern above flickered, casting shadows that danced like ghosts across the walls. The piano player's hands hovered above the keys, but never struck a note, as if even music knew better than to intrude. The story didn't end there, it couldn't. What came next would be written not in whispers or glances, but in choices. In the clash of two wills bound by something stronger than either could break. And as the storm outside raged louder, the silence inside grew heavier, pressing down until it was almost too much to bear. He tightened his grip, she met his fire with her own, and the night bent around them, waiting for the strike that would set everything ablaze. The lantern flame flickered as though it too felt the tension pressing through the saloon. His hand still rested against hers, not forcing, not holding her down, but steady enough to remind her he was not leaving. Her eyes searched his, unblinking, daring him to break first. The room around them tried to move back into rhythm, laughter picking up in a corner, dice rattling on another table, boots shuffling over the planks, but nothing could drown the pull between the two of them. She leaned back slightly, letting her hand linger under his, before pulling away, her fingers slow, deliberate, like a test. He did not chase, and that was exactly what she had expected. Her lips curved, though it wasn't quite a smile. She wanted to see if he still carried the patience he once had, if the man she had known had survived the years and the distance. He sat silent, though his mind was anything but quiet. He remembered the last time he had seen her, standing in the doorway of a ranch house as smoke rose from the fields behind them. He had turned his back then, telling himself it was the right thing, telling himself the path he had chosen would be better for both of them. But choices have a way of rotting with time, and now the truth of it was sitting across from him with fire in her eyes. "You didn't come here by accident," she said finally, her voice steady. "No," he admitted. His tone was rough, not because of whiskey or wariness, but because the words carried too much truth. "I was looking." That caught her, though she didn't let it show. She turned her glass in her hand, watching the light catch the last sip of whiskey. He had always known how to reach her without forcing his way in. It unsettled her now, the way it used to. She set the glass down and pushed it away. "What is it you're after?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. He leaned back, folding his arms. "What I should have found a long time ago." The words sank between them, heavy as iron. She held his gaze, but her heart tightened with a feeling she had buried deep. For all her strength, for all the walls she had built, there was still something about him that could shake her foundations. She despised that, and craved it in the same breath. Outside, the storm rumbled across the plains, the kind of storm that could flood a riverbed overnight and tear down trees that had stood for decades. Inside, The saloon smelled of tobacco and old wood, the air warm and restless. The people in the room pretended not to care, but eyes still cut their way every few moments. They all knew something was brewing, something larger than an ordinary meeting between two old acquaintances. She broke the silence first. Things have changed. This town isn't the same place you left. He nodded slowly, his expression giving nothing away. And you. She let out a dry laugh, shaking her head. I learned to live without waiting. Her words cut, but she meant them too. She wanted him to feel the distance, to know he couldn't just walk back into her world and take the place he once had. Still, her chest ached even as she said it, because part of her wanted to believe he was here for more than unfinished business. He didn't flinch, took the weight of her words like a man who had carried worse. But instead of fighting them, he let them stand. I can see that, he said quietly. But you didn't forget. She hated that he was right. The truth of it sat in her throat, but she didn't answer. Instead, she reached for a different weapon. Questions. Where have you been all these years? What road dragged you back here? He didn't answer right away, and for a moment she thought he might refuse. But finally, he leaned forward, elbows on the table, his face shadowed under the brim of his hat. South first, then west. I rode with men I shouldn't have, stood on ground I didn't belong to, thought I could bury things under work in miles. He paused, his eyes steady on hers. But nothing stays buried, not really. She swallowed hard, though she kept her face calm. His words weren't just about him. They were about them. A chair scraped across the floor nearby, pulling her attention for a moment. Two men at a card table were watching too openly, and she gave them a sharp look that sent them back to their game. Still, the reminder was clear. This was not the place for what they needed to say. She leaned closer, her voice low but sharp. If you came here to stir up ghosts, you'll find this town has plenty already. Some worse than the ones you carry. I didn't come for the town, he said simply, and that truth landed between them like a loaded pistol. Her hand curled against the table, nails pressing into the wood. She wanted to push him away, to remind him that she had built something without him, that she had clawed her way into survival when he had been gone. But the fire in his words struck something deeper, something she had fought too long to keep quiet. The piano started again, soft notes carrying across the saloon, trying to smooth the sharp edges in the air. It didn't work. If anything, the music only deepened the tension, like a soundtrack for a storm that hadn't broken yet. You think it's that easy? She asked, almost a whisper. You show up and everything just stops for you? His eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in resolve. No, but I think you knew I'd come back. Maybe not when, maybe not how. But you knew. Her breath caught, though she hid it well. She hated how much he saw, how much he still understood. She had worked so hard to harden herself, to turn her heart into something unshakable. Yet with every word he reminded her that the walls weren't as strong as she believed. The lantern above their table hissed softly as the wick burned low. Shadows stretched longer across the walls, the night pressing closer. She looked at him then, really looked, and saw the wear carved into his face, the lines that came from more than age. He was still the man she remembered, but he was also someone harder, someone scarred. And that unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. Before she could speak again, the saloon doors creaked open. The wind blew in, carrying the sharp bite of rain, and with it came a figure cloaked in dust and shadow. The room fell quiet, eyes shifting to the newcomer. He walked with purpose, his boots striking hard against the floor, his hat pulled low. The stranger stopped near the bar, scanning the room before settling his gaze on their table. A flicker of recognition passed over his face, and a hush followed. She felt her stomach tighten because she knew that look. Trouble had found them, and whatever was waiting outside their unfinished conversation was about to step inside. The man across from her shifted, his hand brushing the edge of the table again, steady but ready. She saw it in his posture, the way his body prepared, the way his eyes sharpened. The past had walked in with him tonight, but the future might have just arrived through those swinging doors. She leaned closer, her voice a whisper, sharp and cutting through the noise. Whatever you came here for, you better be sure, 'cause once this starts, there's no going back. He didn't answer with words. He met her fire with his own, his gaze unflinching. And in that silent exchange, she understood he had already made his choice. The storm outside cracked, lightning splitting the horizon, thunder rolling across the plains. Inside, the saloon braced itself for what was about to unfold. And as the stranger at the bar took a slow step toward their table, the air grew thick enough to choke. The kind of air that comes right before a gun is drawn or a truth is spoken that can never be taken back. The stranger's boots echoed across the saloon floor, each step deliberate, like the sound of a clock counting down. No one spoke, no one moved too quickly. The piano stopped mid-note. The players at the card table stiffened, and the bartender leaned back against the shelves, watching with narrowed eyes. The storm outside raged, but inside the room the only sound was the rhythm of leather and wood. Her eyes darted toward the man across from her, the one she had been fighting with words and silence. He hadn't moved much, but she could see the way his shoulders shifted, the way his hand inched closer to the edge of the table where his weapon rested in reach. He didn't have to speak. She knew him well enough to understand what every movement meant. He was ready, and he expected her to be the same. The stranger reached their table and stopped. He didn't take off his hat, didn't ask to sit. He just stood there, shadow across his face, voice low but sharp. Didn't think I'd find the two of you together. The words sliced through the air, and for a moment, her breath caught. Together, the word carried weight, the kind that could change how the whole town looked at them, the kind that brought danger faster than bullets. She steadied her voice. "You're mistaken," she said, though even to her own ears the denial rang thin. The man across from her didn't speak. He only raised his head, letting the stranger see his eyes, hard and unyielding. "Eight" was enough. The stranger stiffened, shifting his weight as though the look alone had confirmed what he feared. Tension curled tighter around the room. No one dared to leave. No one dared to interfere. A fight here could spill into something bigger, and in towns like this, bigger trouble didn't take long to grow. The stranger leaned forward slightly, his hand brushing his coat. "You've stirred things you shouldn't have," he said, eyes flicking between them. "There are people outside this town waiting to finish what was started years ago." He pointed slightly toward her. "You're right in the middle, whether you like it or not." Her chest tightened, though her face stayed calm. She had known trouble would follow her, but she hadn't expected it to find her so quickly. Not here, not tonight. She forced herself to keep steady. "I don't scare easy." The man across from her finally spoke, his voice low, carrying the same weight it always had when he wanted the room to know he meant every word. "Then you'll have to deal with me first." The stranger's eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched, and for a long moment, no one breathed. Then, just as quick as he had arrived, he stepped back. "It won't be me," he said, his tone like gravel. "But it's coming. Can't hide from it." With that, he turned and walked toward the doors. The wind howled louder as they swung open, and then he was gone into the storm. The saloon released a collective breath, voices rising again, the piano stumbling back into a tune. But the ease was thin, forced. Everyone had heard the words. Everyone knew trouble was circling closer now. She looked across the table, her eyes searching his. He didn't flinch, didn't soften, but she could see the storm brewing in him just as fierce as the one outside. She asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. He leaned back, the chair creaking under him, and she could tell he was weighing what to say. Finally, he spoke. "There are men still angry over what happened back then, men who never forgave. And you brought that here?" Her voice cut sharper than she intended, her anger flashing before she could pull it back. "You dragged it straight to me." His eyes locked on hers, steady. "It was already coming for you, whether I was here or not." She wanted to argue, wanted to throw his words back at him, but deep down she knew he wasn't lying. There had always been shadows following her, whispers of debts unpaid, choices made years ago that still haunted. She had just convinced herself she could outrun them. The storm outside slammed against the walls, the windows rattling in their frames. For a moment she thought the whole building might give way, but it held, just like the people inside, bracing against the weight pressing down. At another table, the card game picked up again, though the men kept glancing over. Near the bar, a woman with dark hair and sharp eyes whispered something to the bartender, who nodded and disappeared into the back. Subplots were always brewing in towns like this, layers of secrets under every glass poured, every deal made. She shifted in her chair, her hands folding tight in her lap. "If you knew this was coming, why show up now?" His jaw tightened, and his answer came like a confession. "Because I couldn't leave you to face it alone." The words landed heavy, heavier than she wanted them to. Her chest ached, but she forced herself to look away, to steady her breath. She had lived too long depending on no one but herself. Trust was dangerous. Trust was what got you broken. And yet here he was, offering it again, and she couldn't decide if it was salvation or ruin. The saloon doors creaked open again, softer this time. A younger man stepped in, rain dripping from his coat, his eyes darting quickly over the room before settling on their table. He hesitated, then walked over, stopping a few paces away. His voice shook with urgency. "They're coming in from the south road. It's not many yet, but more behind them." The man across from her rose slowly, pushing his chair back without a sound. Its height seemed to grow in that moment, not just from his frame, but from the weight of decision. He looked down at her, his eyes steady. Starting. She stood too, her legs steadier than she felt. Around them, the saloon seemed to sense the shift. Men put down their drinks, some sliding hands toward belts, others slipping out the back. The woman at the bar pulled her shawl tighter, her sharp eyes watching every move. The young man who had delivered the message shifted uneasily. "What do we do?" For a moment, neither of them spoke. The question hung there, not just for them, but for everyone in the room. She finally answered, her voice firm despite the storm twisting inside her. "We stand." The man across from her nodded once, slow and certain. Then he reached for his coat, pulling it over his shoulders with practiced ease. His movements carried the calm of someone who had faced storms before, but she knew better. Calm didn't mean safe. Calm meant prepared. The night outside roared louder, thunder shaking the ground. Somewhere in the distance, voices carried through the wind, men shouting, horses stamping. The storm of flesh and iron was drawing closer, and the saloon walls felt thinner with every passing moment. She glanced at him one last time, her chest tight with everything unspoken. He met her eyes, and for all the fire and history between them. The look said one thing clearly: whatever came through those doors next, they would face it together. The lantern above flickered again, shadows stretching across their faces, as if the night itself wanted to hide what was about to unfold. The saloon braced, the storm pressed harder, and the sound of hoofbeats echoed nearer, steady as a drumbeat calling them into the unknown. The storm outside had grown fierce enough to shake the saloon walls, rattling the shutters until it sounded like bones grinding against wood. Lanterns swayed from their hooks, light throwing jagged shadows that danced across the faces of the men and women inside. The air was thick with silence, the kind that presses down on a room until every breath feels too loud. Hoofbeats echoed faint through the storm, and each beat landed like a hammer driving closer to the heart of the town. She stood by the table, her hand gripping the back of the chair as though it could steady her. Her eyes moved across the room, taking in the faces that had turned toward them. Some looked hungry for a fight, others looked ready to run, but all of them knew something was about to break. She felt the weight of their stares and the weight of the man standing beside her, his shadow long against the floor, his jaw tight, his hand resting near his belt. The young messenger boy shifted uneasily, eyes darting between them and the door. His voice cracked with urgency. "There's more coming. I saw torches, maybe a dozen men, maybe more. They're riding fast." The man beside her didn't flinch, didn't move. He only gave a slow nod, the kind of gesture that carried more certainty than words ever could. She felt her chest tighten at the sight of him, like that calm, still, but with the fire of someone who knew what was waiting and wasn't afraid to meet it. Her breath came shallow. She wanted to ask him why he had chosen now, why he had brought his ghost to her doorstep, but the words stuck in her throat. There wasn't time. The storm outside was no longer just weather, it was a warning, the world itself holding its breath before the strike. At the bar, the sharp-eyed woman pulled a rifle from under the counter, laying it across her lap with the kind of ease that came from experience. She didn't speak, didn't move, just sat waiting, eyes flicking toward the door, as if she could see through the wood to the danger outside. Two men at the card table exchanged looks, one slipping a knife into his boot, the other tugging his hat lower, as though hiding could change what was coming. The saloon felt like a trap now, too many bodies packed into too small a space. The sound of horses outside grew louder, joined by the faint clatter of iron and the sharp bark of orders carried on the wind. She felt the hairs rise on her neck. This wasn't just trouble, it was war knocking at their door. Her companion stepped forward, his boots heavy against the wood, and for a moment all eyes followed him. He stopped near the center of the room, his voice low but carrying. "They're not coming for the town. They're coming for me. Anyone who stays will be caught in it." A murmur swept through the saloon. Some men cursed under their breath, others shook their heads, but no one moved for the door. She saw it in their faces, fear mixed with a kind of stubborn pride. These were people who had lived too long in the shadow of men who thought they could ride into towns and take whatever they wanted. They weren't about to run now, not when they had a chance to stand. Still, his words cut into her. They weren't just after him. The stranger who had walked in earlier had made that clear. Her name was caught up in this too. Tangled in the past she had tried so hard to bury, she swallowed hard, forcing her voice steady. "You said it yourself. They won't stop with you. I'm already in it." He turned his head, meeting her gaze across the room. His eyes softened for the briefest second before hardening again, his voice firm. "Then we hold together." The room stilled again, the sound of rain beating harder against the roof, the windows shaking as if the storm was urging them to hurry. The boy at the door flinched as a shout rose outside. Closer now, the kind of shout men give before they strike. He turned wide eyes back to the room. "They're here." The saloon's air seemed to crack in two. Chairs scraped against the floor as men stood, weapons loosened from belts and boots. The woman at the bar cocked her rifle, the sound loud as thunder in the tense silence. She and the man moved closer to the door, their shoulders brushing, both of them breathing in the same heavy rhythm. She could hear his breath, steady as if he were carved from stone, but she knew better. She knew storms raged inside him just as they did inside her. Outside, hooves pounded against mud, voices rose sharper, steel clanged against steel. The shadows of men with torches flickered across the windows, stretching tall and wild like monsters waiting to strike. The boy whispered, "They're circling the saloon." Her heart slammed against her ribs, but she held her ground. She had lived too long running from things she couldn't face. Tonight she would not run. She shifted her stance, her hand brushing the handle at her side, her voice low but certain. "If they want me, they'll have to fight for it." He glanced at her, and in that moment she saw something in his eyes that she hadn't seen in years. Not just fire, not just defiance, but something like faith. He trusted her to stand, trusted her to meet this storm as his equal. And for the first time, she felt the weight of that trust settle not like a burden, but like armor. The door rattled hard under a pounding fist, a voice booming from the other side. "Send him out, or we burn you all inside." The room froze. No one moved. No one spoke. The firelight from outside leaked through the cracks, casting long shadows across their faces. She looked at him, her breath catching. This was at the moment before everything broke apart. He didn't answer the threat, not with words. He only looked at her, and she saw the choice written there, heavy and final. The storm outside had arrived, and there was no hiding from it now. The pounding came again, harder this time, the door shaking on its hinges. The bartender muttered a curse under his breath, his hand trembling as he reached for the shotgun under the counter. The sharp-eyed woman lifted her rifle, steady as stone. The men at the card table exchanged one last look, then nodded grimly. She pressed closer to him, the warmth of his arm brushing hers, her voice barely more than a whisper. "What if this is the end?" His reply came low, rough, but certain. "Then we end it standing." The door shook again, splinters snapping from the frame. Outside, the storm roared, thunder splitting the sky. Inside, the saloon seemed to hold its breath, every soul waiting for the moment when wood would splinter, fire would pour in, and the fight they had all been dreading would finally begin. She felt her pulse hammering in her throat, her palms damp, her body tense as a drawn bow. Around her, the room braced, the kind of stillness that comes in the second before lightning strikes. The boy gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles white, his eyes wide with fear and awe. The door rattled one last time, then stilled. For a moment, silence reigned, the storm outside seeming too quiet. It was almost worse than the pounding, that silence, that waiting. She could feel the weight of it pressing down on her chest, heavier than iron. And then came the sound, a boot kicking hard against the door, the crack of wood breaking, the roar of men outside surging forward. The lanterns inside flickered, the shadows deepened, and the saloon filled with the sound of hearts racing and breaths held tight. The storm had come to their doorstep, and there was no turning back. The door gave way with a crack that seemed to split the night in two. Men spilled inside, shadows twisting in the lamplight, their voices a roar of anger and demand. The air filled with smoke from torches, the heat and the rain-soaked smell of horses flooding in with them. In that first heartbeat, everything froze, the faces inside the saloon tight with fear and resolve, the men outside burning with vengeance. Then all at once the storm broke. She moved without thinking, her body remembering strength born out of years of surviving. Beside her, he stepped forward, steady and unyielding, the weight of his presence drawing the fight toward him. Shouts clashed with gunfire, wood splintered, glass shattered. The saloon became a storm of its own, a storm of fire and steel and desperate breaths. She felt the pull of chaos all around her, but her focus stayed sharp. Each move she made was guided not only by instinct, but by the fire that had kept her alive through all the years of hardship. He was there too, close enough that she felt the heat of his determination, the way he refused to let the tide consume them. The fight stretched on like a fever dream, torches falling, boots pounding, voices rising in fury and fear. Men fell, some from the storm outside, some from the storm inside, but through it all, the two of them stood. When the smoke cleared and the echoes faded, the night held only the sound of rain washing the dust and blood into the mud outside. She stood in the quiet aftermath, her chest heaving, her hands trembling against the table she had once leaned on, as though it were the only thing keeping her steady. Around her the saloon bore scars, broken glass, shattered chairs, bullet holes in the walls, but it still stood just as they did. He was there, his face streaked with sweat and soot, his eyes on her as though she were the only anchor he had left in the world. The fire in his gaze hadn't dimmed, but it had softened, touched now by something deeper. He took a slow step toward her, the weight of silence heavy between them. She met his eyes, searching, waiting. The man who had once walked away from her was here now, not just in body but in resolve. She felt it in the steadiness of his breath, the way he carried himself even after the storm. He wasn't running anymore. The sharp-eyed woman at the bar lowered her rifle, her lips set in a thin line, and gave a small nod. Around the room the others shifted slowly back into themselves, some shaken, some hardened, but all alive. The young messenger boy leaned against the counter, his wide eyes still filled with awe at what he had witnessed. Life had a way of forcing children to grow too fast, and she knew this night had carved a mark in him that would never fade. She turned back to him, her voice rough, but steady. "It's done," he shook his head. "Not done, just finished here." The words struck her harder than the fight itself. He was right. The men who had come tonight weren't the only ones. There would be others, more shadows from the past waiting on roads ahead. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel the weight of facing it alone. The saloon slowly settled back into rhythm. The piano was silent, its keys splintered by stray fire, but the quiet hum of voices began again, softer this time, more thoughtful. People swept up broken glass, righted overturned chairs, as though repairing the room could repair the weight of what had happened inside it. She stepped outside, the cool rain hitting her skin like a bomb. The street was littered with torches, their flames drowned by the downpour, their smoke curling into the night sky. The storm was passing now, the thunder rolling farther away, the wind gentler. She breathed deep, the scent of wet earth filling her lungs. He joined her, standing just close enough that she felt the warmth of him, even through the rain. For a moment they didn't speak. The silence wasn't heavy. Now it was steady, like the ground after a quake, fragile but holding. Finally, she broke it. "All these years, I thought you left me to carry the weight alone." He turned his face toward her, his eyes shadowed but sure. "I thought leaving would keep you safe. I was wrong." The honesty in his voice cut deep, but it also healed something she hadn't realized was still raw. She let the rain run over her face, washing away the sweat, the dust, the remnants of fear. Her chest loosened, her hands unclenched. For the first time, she let herself believe in the possibility of something beyond survival. The night air was quiet, except for the sound of rain dripping from the rooftops and the soft snort of horses tied to the posts. The town lay bruised but unbroken, its people stronger than the shadows that had tried to consume them. She looked at him again, her voice softer now. "So where do we go from here?" His eyes met hers, steady and unyielding. wherever the road takes us. But this time, we ride it together. The words settled into her, like the final piece of a puzzle she hadn't known she was missing. For all the pain, for all the fire, the road ahead no longer seemed like a burden. It felt like a chance. She reached out, her hand brushing his, and for a moment they stood there in the rain, the world around them washed clean. The storm had tried to break them, but instead it had forged something stronger, something that could not be undone. Inside, the sharp-eyed woman watched them through the window, a faint smile crossing her face before she turned back to her rifle, oiling the metal with practiced care. The messenger boy slept on the bar, exhaustion pulling him down after the night's terror. The men at the card table quietly dealt another hand, as though holding on to the rhythm of life was their way of honoring survival. The saloon would open again in the morning, its scars still fresh, but its doors still swinging. The town would whisper about the storm, about the man and woman who had stood their ground, about the night shadows had been turned back. And on the edge of town, the two of them would ride out into the dawn, their silhouettes cutting sharp against the rising light. She didn't know what waited on the road, and she didn't pretend to. But as the rain slowed and the sky began to pale, she knew one truth with certainty. Whatever came next, she would not face it alone. The storm had come, and the storm had passed, but the fire that had been lit inside them would carry on, burning brighter than the shadows ever could. The story of the night would linger, carried in whispers and memory, but for her it was more than a tale. It was proof that even when the past hunts you, even when storms crash against your walls, there is a way forward. And sometimes, that way begins with standing side by side, against the darkness. The road stretched wide before them, the plains endless, the horizon painted in colors of a new dawn. She tightened her hand against his, steady and sure. For the first time, the weight of the years seemed lighter. As the first rays of sunlight cut through the rain clouds, they rode into the day, not as strangers bound by history, but as two souls bound by choice. The saloon behind them faded into the distance, its lanterns dimming, its stories settling into the walls. Ahead, the land opened wide and untamed, waiting for the next step, the next fight, the next chance at something worth holding on to. And though the storm would rise again someday, she knew they would be ready. The night had not broken them. It had bound them, forged them, and set them on a road neither had to walk alone again. And that, more than the fight, more than the fire, was the truth worth carrying forward.